This is Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and this is my full review of the Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra, Samsung's flagship, best of the best non-folding phone for 2022. A week ago I did a first look. Now that I've had this for a little over a week, I'm ready to do the full review. So, flagship, best of the best. What does this mean? Price tag, $1,200 starting price, which is the same as last year despite inflation and all that, thank goodness. And it's a little bit cheaper than the Note 20 Ultra, its close cousin, cost when it first came out. But still, I know it's offensively expensive to some of you out there. And you can either say Samsung has decided to give us everything they could possibly give us with a price tag to match, and then they have the S22 Plus for $999, the S22 for $799, the FE sitting in between size-wise for $699. So there are phones for every price point. But this is what happens when you put everything in there. I mean, what do you mean by everything? 6.8-inch, very high resolution, 120 hertz variable refresh OLED display. Nice enough right there. Ultrasonic in-display fingerprint scanner, 2D facial recognition, ultra-wideband, Wi-Fi 6E. A lot of laptops still don't have that. 5G, both sub-6 and millimeter wave. IP68 dust and water resistant. The latest Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 processor, or Exynos 2200 if you happen to be in Europe and some other countries. Also supposed to be a pretty good CPU this time around. 4 storage choices all the way up to 1 terabyte. 7 color choices. Probably they'll add more later on. And I haven't even touched on the cameras yet, which is probably the biggest feature set here, including the only phone you're going to see with a 10x optical zoom on board. So when you put all those things in there, you're like, okay, I get it. This is for people who want to have the tops of everything and everything that is possible in a phone. We're going to look at it now. But we still haven't touched on everything. Remember when I referenced the Samsung Galaxy Note 20 Ultra? Well, yes, this has an S Pen. In fact, this is the one, as you know by now. It's sort of really a Note. It has the flat top and bottom on. It still has curved sides. And 4,096 pressure levels, even faster pen response, which means less latency, which means immediate inking the minute you start drawing, better predictive algorithms where it tries to figure out where you're going next with that pen, all of that sort of thing, and the usual air commands you've got for taking screenshots or torturing people with your PowerPoint presentations and advancing each slide if that's part of your job description. And of course, Bluetooth, NFC, Samsung Pay, and you're getting the idea. 40 megapixel selfie camera for those of you who really want to show yourself and whoever is standing around you in the most high possible detail. All right, cool. So now that we've gone through all the justifications for why a phone might cost this much, and after 3 years of the Ultra costing this much, I guess we're used to it. Besides, one thing that helps too is Samsung has just extended their OS update guarantee to 4 years, beating even Google and their Pixel line for software updates. So that is an acknowledgement that, number one, yes, the phones are very high quality and very fast, probably so fast you're not going to be complaining about the speed of the phone anytime soon, especially since One UI 4 is a pretty responsive piece of software on top of Android 12. But they know that you're keeping your phones longer because they are very expensive, because they are very sophisticated, and they are pretty well made. So that's a nice piece of assurance too. Now, lest this start to sound like a Samsung commercial, which by no means is it going to be, it's not a perfect phone. It is, however, a big, heavy, 229 grams phone. Some of you won't like the curved display on the sides. It's not a radical, steep curve, but it's there. I say you kind of need it because this is a wide phone, wider than the Note 20 Ultra even, and it's not really very comfortable in the hand when you hold something that has straight sides on both sides, and it's not a super, super thin phone either, so there's that. When it comes to photography, some of the marketing is still, well, it's marketing, like the 100x space zoom, though it has improved from the previous generation where we first saw it. So while I found it really pretty much unusable, if you're using a tripod or resting it on something, you can get sort of workable detail, other than the perv effect there for, I hope you're not doing things with this you shouldn't be. It is sometimes useful, mostly for trying to figure out what is that far in the distance. You can see the example. I'm standing in the front of a supermarket, and I start with the 1x normal, and then I go to the 10x, which is still optical, yay that, and then I go to 100x, and there's some broccoli or whatever it is in the back. So I could have stood still and that wouldn't have helped any, because you know what? If you're ever in any place where there's some people moving around, it's still going to be a challenge. Besides the fact the 100x goes woo, woo, like if you've ever used a long telephoto lens on a camera, people moving are going to make it a little bit harder. So you're not necessarily going to get real sharpness there, but that's not important. Because what is important is 30x zoom has improved, and it's somewhat usable now. And it is really handy if you're like, say you're in the airport and you're trying to read what the terminal says for your flight or something like that, and then there's a crowd of people, you don't want to walk over there. You can actually make it readable just using the camera lens. And for those of you who are just into photography, that 10x zoom optical is the bee's knees. As Samsung somehow managing to get the consistency between 4 different camera lenses and sensors so tight. It's not easy. It's all software, no doubt, and that's one of the reasons why having a fast processor helps here. But the color, the contrast, the overall sharpness is so similar between these lenses. The 10x will be the softest. It has doesn't have as wide an aperture, which can hurt a little bit in low light, that sort of thing, but generally speaking, very close. Anyway, 10x, that's a whole lot of zoom. That's like 230 millimeter reach in a 35 millimeter camera. So optical is usable. This is nice. So for those of you who love your standalone camera, and one of the reasons you weren't relying on a camera phone is because you don't have high quality zoom, we're starting to see that. So that's one of my favorite features of this. Now the 3x zoom lens is also very good. It's also optical, and of course you can choose increments in between if you want. I tend to stick with the actual focal length of the lenses for the best quality, and you can go to the ultra wide, which is 0.6. The main sensor is 108 megapixel. You can choose to either do pixel binning and actually shoot it at 108 megapixels, or you can have it shoot in its automated way. Now I did, you can see a couple of shots, one after the other, and I see a little more naturalness and a little bit less of that typical over-sharpening that we see in camera phones with the 108 megapixel. But I have a feeling a lot of everyday average people are just really going to stick with the normal mode, not the 108 megapixel, even though it's an interesting thing to have and in theory makes for better cropping for most times when your zoom range isn't still sufficient and you want something high quality. You can shoot in RAW mode if you want. There's Pro mode. They don't have Apple's cinematic mode, which lets you pull focus from one thing or person to another, but they do have a kind of portrait mode video where it follows that person's face and keeps that face in detail and everything else broken out. It's not that sophisticated. The 8K video is more of a party trick at this point. In a couple of years, maybe if we have more 8K TVs, that'll seem useful, but you know. But the 4K 60 frame per second video and 30 frame per second video is the best Samsung's done yet. And my opinion hasn't changed since the first look. I mean, we know the iPhone really just kicks everybody else to the curb when it comes to video quality. You can argue that this one might have the better still cameras than the iPhone 13 Pro or Pro Max, but video, Apple still has it for stabilization, for less artifacting, for a more natural look. But this is definitely an improvement. The stabilization is better on it. There is less of that digital artifacting kind of look, but they could do even better, but it's good to see improvement. Night mode is also improved, but it's a little bit less, in a way, relevant here because one of the benefits of having a very large sensor and a wide aperture lens, particularly if you're using that f1.8 main lens on this, is it lets a lot of light in. So I've noticed, and I still see that fact that it doesn't offer to, or need to kick into night mode as often. It can actually just shoot the shot. And you'll get the most natural and sharpest shot if you're not using night mode, which kind of makes sense. You're not using software interpolation and other bells and whistles to try to make things look better. And like I said in my first look, it looks more natural as well. So things don't look like night turned into day quite as much, and colors don't look quite as unbelievable when you are in night mode. All right, before I spend the entirety of this video on the camera, a couple more words about Samsung has definitely improved the cameras. It's an incremental improvement over the S21 Ultra. You're probably not going to jump ship and upgrade year to year just based on that. But besides the fact that the telephoto lenses have improved, they look sharper, they look better, they look more consistent, matching the other lenses on the camera. And besides the fact night mode is better, they have changed the color science here. They've increased the contrast, which I think most people like, and the colors are a bit more natural. They're still a little over-zinging, and pictures are maybe a little more brightened compared to certainly the Pixel 6 Pro or the iPhone 13 Pro Max, both of which go for a more naturalistic look, though the iPhone also warms things up. But overall, the photography is improved here. So it's getting to the point where I don't feel like I have to carry my Fujifilm XS10 camera as often. I'm a real photo enthusiast, so I still will, but it takes very nice shots. Now, compared to the Pixel 6 Pro, I would say it's more consistent, believe it or not. The Pixel 6 Pro's software has been a little buggier than most Google releases, so consistency between lenses and the number of keepers, I would say Samsung's winning here. Versus the iPhone, it trades blows, you know what I mean? It's really close. It depends if you like a warmer shot, which is the iPhone's, or a cooler shot, which is the Samsung's. But I would say Samsung gets the edge here, certainly for their portrait mode that's improved, less getting your frizzy hair trimmed off in portrait mode, for example. And also because they have 10x optical zoom. It's just more versatile. If you go to the zoo, you can take pictures, or to an air show. Yeah. All right, on to the rest of it. The S Pen, one of my favorite things. Much as I'm going to try to be unbiased, and I usually am fairly unbiased in our reviews, I have to admit I liked the Ultra among all the S22 models because I was a Note fan. So we've got that notiness thing going on, plus I'm a photography buff, and we got that high-end photography thing going on. But the S Pen is just wonderful if you like to use, well, a pen with your phone. The drawback I find, two of them, is this is a shiny, slippery Gorilla Glass Victus Plus display, and the pen just kind of skates. It's a little hard to control whether taking notes or whether doing artwork. Doesn't mean I can't do artwork. It means that I wish I had a rubbery nib for the pen tip or a matte screen protector, not the most common thing for a phone, to have a little more control over it, to be precise with my art. The pen itself is wonderful. 4,096 pressure levels, Wacom EMR. It's responsive, it's accurate, it's delightful in that respect. Also nice is there's a pen included, and it lives in a silo just like a Note, so good times that. And the other drawback I find is that today's phones are very tall and very narrow. And whether you're taking notes or whether you're doing art, this is not the most ideal aspect ratio. If you're taking notes and holding it in portrait mode, you write 2 or 3 words per line before you run out of room. And with art, you know, most of us do a golden ratio or a 3:2 aspect ratio canvas or something like that. You don't draw on paint in ultra widescreen. So it's a little weird in that respect. And the Galaxy Z Fold 3 kind of appeals a little bit when it comes to that, and doesn't have a slippery display either. All right, another thing I really couldn't talk about a lot in our first look review was battery life, because it takes a while to test it, at least a week. Not just for the phone to settle down and do any optimizations it's going to do, but because I believe in real world tests. This whole idea of you test a phone until it dies by having it running and doing stuff continuously, that's not how we use our phones, is it? You don't run your phone for 6 hours straight, normally speaking. You use it for 2 to 20 minutes at a time during the day, probably on and off a variety of tasks, from taking photos to making calls to texting to looking up stuff on the web to maybe playing a little gaming. You put it back in your pocket or your purse or wherever it is you keep it. You put it on the desk, you know. Then you pick it up again, and maybe at night you want to watch some videos, be it YouTube or whatever streaming service is your favorite, and you might watch something for an hour or 2 hours. So I try to replicate that kind of testing, and I leave it at the default settings, which is full HD plus for the display resolution with 120 Hz adaptive refresh for the display and automatic brightness, and the standard performance setting for the processor. And it was delightfully hard to kill. I tell you, that's the nice thing about the Ultra and the preceding S21 Ultra, whose battery life I find was about the same, is it feels pretty hard to kill it. It's not iPhone 13 Pro Max level, because there Apple does control the ecosystem more tightly and can really optimize stuff, but I got about an average of 6.5 hours of screen on time, and that is with doing some of the more heavy tasks like playing games and shooting photos and videos and all that stuff. Probably more than a normal person would do in any given day. That's pretty solid. And compared to the Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 3, it lasts considerably longer. It's noticeable. Where the Z Fold 3, I always have to plug in at the end of the day. This one, with normal use, I could go through the day and into the next day before having to plug it in. Another thing that helps is it does support 45-watt wired fast charging. You don't get a charger in the box, just like you don't get a headphone jack or a micro SD card slot anymore. But 45-watt laptop chargers are pretty common these days. You can use one of those or get Samsung's compact one when it's available again. Anyway, so that can top you up. You can go from 50 to 100% in a half an hour or less. So it reduces your battery anxiety as well. So I'm pretty good with that. For wireless charging, you still get 15 watt, which is called fast wireless charging. Not as fast as what OnePlus does, but pretty much that's what everybody else is offering. And yeah, it has reverse wireless charging or power share, so you can charge a Galaxy Watch or Buds or something using the back of the phone. Last thing to talk about is pricing. Not the price tag, but the fact that Samsung always has great deals, particularly for pre-orders. And often you'll see stores continue to have some pretty solid deals. Probably not as good as the pre-order deals, but anyway, if you pre-order, then you can get up to $250 worth of accessories. This is probably why half the folks in the world have Galaxy Watches or Buds and stuff, because they get them as freebies with the phone. You can get a free upgrade from the 128 to the 256 gig model when you pre-order. Same price as if you bought the base model. And they have, in the United States, they're very generous trade-ins. Not so much for the folding phones, interestingly, but for most others, you get probably at least as much as you'd be able to sell it for locally without the hassle of selling it locally. Also, I think in part Samsung inflates their prices to equate them with luxury products to match what the iPhone is priced at, right? And they may have more leeway in their pricing. So therefore, you see more discounts, like more carrier discount deals, more big box store discount deals that continue on afterwards. So you don't have to pay $1,200 for this phone if you look around. So that's the Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra with its new minimalist design. I wasn't sure if I liked the camera design or the lack of the thingy around it, the domino, but I've decided it looks pretty clean and it's probably going to age well versus add-on stuff like fins on 50 cars, just there for the looks. Didn't age well, right? This is pretty clean. It's pretty nice. Obviously, it's an iterative design insofar as the S22 Ultra combined with the Note 20 Ultra. So you can't say, hey, wow, it's something completely new. But in terms of getting everything in here and the stuff that people care about, no more of the silly hardware gimmicks and stuff and software that Samsung used to throw in. I mean, this is the everything phone, priced at the everything phone price. It's top dog. I'm Lisa from Mobile Tech Review. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more cool tech videos and hit the notification bell so you know about them.